Honorable, the Speaker.
Honourable members, as indicated earlier, an item was deferred to later in today's sitting by agreement. We shall now revert to that item.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in accordance with Standing Order 53, I beg to move that the debate on the private member's motion number 4 be adjourned.
Honourable members, the question is that the debate on private member's motion number 4 be adjourned.
I know, but just for clarity,
Member for point of...
the time that is taken during private member will be given back at the end, right?
Honourable members, the question is that the debate on motion number 4 be now adjourned. All in favour say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it.
Statements by ministers.
Minister of Public Administration.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I am authorized by the Cabinet to make this statement. It is well known that the negotiation and execution of all agreements for the rental of property to be occupied by the government or government agencies is handled by the Property and Real Estate Division, Service Division, PRESD, in accordance with the established policy and procedures. Earlier this week, a number of allegations surfaced in the public domain to the effect that the Attorney General had a material conflict between his private interests and his public duty, and had used his public office to improperly procure the rental by the government of the property at number 3 Alexandra Street, St. Clair. Madam Speaker, nothing could be further from the truth, as the following facts will reveal. In fact, contrary to allegations in the public domain, at all material times, the Attorney General declared his interest in the property at number 3 Alexandra Street, St. Clair, and recused himself from all deliberations and decisions made on the rental of this property, whether in Cabinet or in subcommittees of the Cabinet. Further, throughout the negotiations for the rental of this property, the annual returns and other relevant documents regarding the directors and shareholders of the company that owns the property were filed at the company's registry and made available to the PRESD. By way of explanation, the following well-established procedures apply to the rental of properties by the government ministries, departments, or agencies. In the first instance, the ministry, department, or agency that requires accommodation submits a request to the PRESD with details of its user and space requirements. An assessment is then done of the floor area and building characteristics that are required, and a search begins for suitable property. Suitable property is identified either by the PRESD or by the ministry, department, or the agency itself. Once suitable property is identified, the PRESD seeks to secure satisfactory technical reports from statutory agencies or persons involved in the inspection, certification, and approval of office buildings. In addition, to other important documents, such as the title deed, tax clearance certificate, and annual returns. Specifically, with respect to the rental of the housing, of the building at number 3 Alexandra Street, Sinclair, and contrary to the allegations in the public domain, firm expressions of interest in the rental by government of this property date back to 10 years ago as follows. 1. On January the 14th, 2009, Presley wrote to Mr. Faris Al-Rawi of Zaman Enterprises offering to rent the property. 2. On January the 20th, 2012, under the former UNC government, the Ministry of Housing, Environment, which was responsible for the rental of properties by government at the time, wrote to Mrs. Mona Nahus of Zaman Enterprises inquiring about the availability of the same building. This letter was copied to Dr. Rudal Munilal, the then Minister of Housing and the Environment, and to the Director of Personnel Administration. 3. On October the 9th, 2017, the Ministry of Labor and Small Enterprise Development expressed its interest in the same property. In December 2018, the Ministry of Labor and Small Enterprise Development withdrew its interest in the rental of the property. However, as early as April 2018, the Personnel Department had indicated their desire in leasing the same property to accommodate its head office and other divisions. This interest was subsequently reconfirmed by the CPO on December 27, 2018, when it became known that the Ministry of Labor and Small Enterprise Development was no longer pursuing the rental of the property. Accordingly, a note was submitted to Cabinet by the Minister of Public Administration on February 7, 2019, with respect to the rental of the property for the use by the Personnel Department. The rental was subsequently approved and confirmed by the Cabinet on February 14th, 2019. Madam Speaker, it has also been alleged that the rental of the property does not represent value for money. However, the property is a brand new A-class office building with modern amenities such as a standby generator, storage facilities, 213 passenger elevators, and 89 covered car park spaces. Further, the rental of the property will allow the Personnel Department to consolidate its current operations under one roof, which are currently scattered across several locations. The agreed rental of $575,000 per month, VAT exclusive, is also below the fair market value rental rate, which was determined by the Commissioner of Valuations to be $640,000 per month, VAT exclusive, and below an independent valuation from Lyndon Scott and Associates, who recommended a rental of $600,000 per month, VAT exclusive. Additionally, in an effort to save taxpayers from unnecessary expense, the landlord has given the Personnel Department 3 months rent-free occupation to facilitate the fitting out of the building. This has set a new precedent as to how this government conducts its business. It is noteworthy that the rental and other occupational costs for the various locations, including state-owned premises at Tower D, currently occupied by the Personnel Department, is in excess of $900,000. Finally, Madam Speaker, it would be remiss of me not to make the point that over the past 30 years, the government has on many occasions rented properties owned by cabinet ministers or their relatives. For example, in December 2010, the UNC government rented a property to accommodate the Ministry of National Security from DW Holdings Limited, which is owned by the son of Jack Warner, who at the time was a minister in the UNC government. Further, prior to the 2015 election, the NLCB rented property from the children of Jerry Hadid, a minister in the UNC government. There are several other examples of this practice under all government over the years. I trust, Madam Speaker, that the foregoing has cleared the air on this matter and put the rest of the false allegations currently in the current domain at rest. Madam Speaker, I thank you.
Member for Oropuch East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Pursuant to 24(4) in my 15 seconds. Madam Speaker, in reference to the ministerial statement a second ago, could, in the context of what the minister has said, arguing that it was a steal of a deal rather than a steal, could the minister indicate to us on February 14th, Valentine's Day this year, when this gift was done, who was the Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago on that day?
Member, I don't see this arising out of the statement or even requiring clarification based on the statement.
Could I ask the minister whether the minister believes that this should be a precedent for future governments in this country to have ministers with direct beneficial interest in government contracts and rentals obtaining such from the cabinet of which he or she is a part, not their children, brother, sister, mother, or father, but the minister himself or herself. Is this a precedent that you would like to see?
Minister of Public Administration.
Madam Speaker, as I said, this is something, upon my research, this is something that has been happening for years, over 30 years. And I dare say, Madam Speaker, that whatever this government does, we do it above board, we do it with transparency and very open.
No hidden names.
Absolutely no hidden. Exactly. Thank you.
Honourable members, Member for Naparima and members of the front row, there's developing a penchant to engage in continuous crosstalk. You are all now experienced members. You know how to make an intervention in accordance with the standing orders. I really don't think that this should be tolerated. And I hope I don't have to speak to any member about this. Not just for today, the rest of the session. The debate on the private motion, which was adjourned at today's sitting, will be resumed. Be it resolved that the government take urgent steps to ensure the protection of our nation's women. Member for Couva North, you have 16 minutes and 25 seconds of your original speaking time left.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Back to some serious politics. Madam Speaker, so I was on my list of recommendations with respect to assisting victims of domestic violence. And I was on the point of care for victims of violence against women. And what can be recommended is guaranteeing appropriate medical and psychological care, legal assistance, and emergency housing alternatives for the victims. Another such recommendation would be implementing free telephone hotlines, and I know that the minister earlier on made reference to that, at national levels to receive reports of all forms of violence against women. Funding a public campaign to increase the visibility and accessibility of this service, and I made mention of that earlier, where the minister needs to communicate effectively to the public to let them know what is happening and how they can access help. In addition to that, Madam Speaker, data registry systems, and I know that the minister before made reference to the data registry system, but is it public? The central registry system. Right, so it's not, sorry.
Give way.
I will continue. We'll talk after. So data registry systems. designing and implementing national and subnational unified data registry systems to document the number of women and girls victims of the multiple forms of violence against women by disaggregating data by sex, age, and form of violence, and by creating and maintaining unified online database of the stats on cases of violence against women that is available as public info, including the evolution of the prevalence of violence against women in all its forms. So this recommendation seeks to encourage governments to make the registry public. Improving indicators and measurements of healthcare services, psychological, social, and legal support requested by and provided to victims of violence at local levels. Generating info required for tailoring programs and services to the specific needs of the population. So that's another recommendation, Madam Speaker. Prevention of violence against women. We need to develop a mass media campaign to deconstruct violence against women. Ensure all primary and secondary schools incorporate education and info aimed to eliminate gender stereotypes and violence against women. And Madam Speaker, I know that within our education sector informally, this sort of education has already started to take place. Now, Madam Speaker, I want to shift focus a little bit because, you know, as we stand here on different sides, many persons would ask, what did you do or what have you done as a former government with respect to eliminating and dealing with domestic violence against women? So I just want to highlight quickly some of the work that we did whilst we were there. Now, Madam Speaker, let me start by saying that there were amendments to the Maternity Protection Act for increased maternity leave and to repeal the Masters and Servants Ordinance. 320 women graduated from the Women in Harmony program for a single head of households with low or no skills and low or no income. The URP Women's Program, Madam Speaker, during our time, we were able to increase their salaries and make it on par with that of the males. We also introduced the baby grant for single mothers. And of course, today we're very disheartened to know that there hasn't been a reinstatement of that particular baby grant. But it was very, very important in assisting single mothers and of course giving them a measure of independence at the end of the day when it came to cost. No. So, Madam Speaker, you will have your time to respond, member. Okay, so that baby grant, whether, it doesn't matter how many grants were given out. Government is a continuum, and it was a good initiative, a good program. If you wanted to adapt it to your liking in different ways, change it up, modify it, so be it. But it helped single mothers at the end of the day with respect to cost of taking care of their young ones. And that is what is very important. It's a recommendation that has been made. Madam Speaker, in addition to that, we had in plan, and I know that the minister spoke about the homes, the transition homes and all of that, but it wasn't really clear with respect to what was there before and whether or not there was an intention to go ahead with it. Now, in August of 2015, under the Ministry of Gender, Youth and Child Development, which we got kudos for as a government in forming during our time, a regional assessment center was constructed at Manahambra Road, St. Madeleine, and it was opened in August of 2015. Whoever is probably responding after me could probably tell us what is the status. Is that building still currently carrying out the function that it was constructed for? The assessment center in Shogunas, as far as we know, it was completed. But what is happening to that particular center? Is it being utilized? That was also a very important center that needed to be used because it was completed during our time. The female safe house, I would like to get an update on that. The male safe home, the male transition homes. So these were some of the projects And as I have been advised, there were about 70% and more to completion when we left government at that point in time. So if we can get a statement or a status with respect to that from the next speaker. So, Madam Speaker, there were a lot of initiatives that were implemented by the former government, and of course I know that some of them continued under this present government. And as the minister before me said, we need all hands on deck, and everybody needs to work together to see how best we can deal with the scourge of domestic violence and sexual offenses against our women. Now, in addition to that, in just today's newspaper, Madam Speaker, I recall reading a statement from the head of the Police Complaints Authority, where he said, because part of this motion deals with human trafficking, where he mentioned that the rogue police element is involved in human trafficking, and because it pays well. And therefore, that issue is a serious issue that needs to be dealt with by the Minister of National Security and the Commissioner of Police. So I just want to flag for their info that persons out there are speaking about it, they are aware, and I would like to know what is going to be done about dealing with that rogue element in the police service that, of course, they are now involved in that human trafficking issue. And, of course, with the situation with our next-door neighbor, what is happening in Venezuela, it is now more prevalent than before, and therefore it needs to be dealt with. I know that there was a situation with the 19 girls that was dealt with. So we need to continue on that path, and we need to pluck that rogue element out of the police service as best as we can and as fast as we can to ensure that our women are safe at the end of the day. Now, Madam Speaker, over the years, we have had many recommendations coming to us, and it's been out there. There have been workshops spearheaded by NGOs, numerous NGOs out there. I know Hazel Brown is one of our pioneers, and she has been really advocating for protection of women against domestic violence for the longest while. And just some forms of abuse that exist and what can happen. Now, I spoke about the protection order earlier on, and that is something that needs to be looked at again because, again, it has been said that that protection order has now become useless. So we need to deal with that. But there are other measures. Now, I remember, Madam Speaker, CEDAW, we are all part of that CEDAW agreement, where it deals with, like a human rights bill, but it deals with women's rights. And it is really a document that deals with rights of the women. And I have seen certain islands, Dominica, for example, has implemented. So in the absence, they don't have a gender policy, and they have, in the absence of their gender policy, used that and termed it a woman bill of rights, where they have, of course, clear, definite clauses that deal with protection of women from domestic violence, sexual abuse, and other issues affecting women. And it has proven to be very, very effective in that country. And therefore, probably it's something that we can look at here, because I know for years we have had gender policies in different cabinets, you know, new versions, different versions, we tweak versions. And to date, this current government that promised in their manifesto that they were going to come with the gender policy, we are yet to see that. And I want to recommend that this Women Bill of Rights that we see Dominica has adopted that works for them, that probably we can take a look at that and see whether or not it can work here. And I'm very positive about that, because it's actual legislation that is now being implemented or has been implemented in Dominica that has worked, and they have seen a decrease in the number of women afflicted and, of course, protection of their rights. So, Madam Speaker, in addition to that, let me also say that there was a report, a National Review Trinidad and Tobago, done on the Beijing Platform for Action. And that was 2 years ago. It was about 2 years ago this report was done. 2014 this report was done. And it really is a positive document, Madam Speaker. And as much as there's still so much to be done, we have come a long way in terms of dealing with women, protecting our women, So it's really something important that everyone should read and look at and improve from there. And it has a lot to do with, of course, legislation brought and programs and policies implemented by the various ministries over the years in terms of dealing with the protection of women against domestic violence and otherwise. Now, Madam Speaker, we coexist in a region where, you know, it's easy to feed off what is happening in other areas and other jurisdictions and implement here. And in addition to that, let me say that this gender policy that I make reference to, as much as persons are calling for it, I think it's high time that we evolve from that situation. You know, we move forward. We look at another alternative at the end of the day. I mean, if you can't, this current government can't bring the gender policy, and there are sensitive issues that you don't want to touch and handle, there are other mechanisms by which, and again, I want to strongly recommend that Women Bill of Rights that I mentioned earlier. Now, Madam Speaker, there were some recommendations, again, that we had in terms of dealing with the protection of women's rights. And it had to do a lot with, of course, sorry, yes, go ahead.
Thanks, Kuva North.
Thank you.
You noted that we didn't bring the gender policy, but I remember in March of 2018, we laid the gender policy in this parliament as a green paper, and I would have noted in this statement that we would have adopted that official policy going forward, right? And the other thing I want to correct, that you mentioned that Dominica did not have a gender policy, when they in fact have a gender policy, even though it may be as conservative as ours, but there is one in Dominica as well.
And they do have the Women Bill of Rights also, Madam Speaker, that they really refer to more than that gender policy, which I'm sure would have come after that Women Bill of Rights, bearing from that CEDAW agreement that would have been implemented within that jurisdiction. Now, Madam Speaker, I also want to recommend that there were some programs under us that we were looking to spearhead that I want to share. The nursing and healthcare education and training facility was established, but I don't think that it is being used to its full potential, and therefore that can be looked at in terms of dealing with women, protection, and all of that. There was another plan, the proposed pilot program, How to Nurture Baby, Right Start, Breast is Best, and Mothers Supporting Mothers for Expectant Parents, that should be implemented as a comprehensive strategy for prenatal, maternal, and baby and early childhood care, again to help especially single mothers. A multi-pronged strategy intended to deal with reproductive issues and to empower women in seeking good health during pregnancy. Maternal and child health policy and standard operating procedures for obstetrics and midwifery will be updated and should be updated and implemented. Another recommendation, Madam Speaker, antenatal and postnatal care services that should be improved by purchasing additional equipment needed to track the health of mothers-to-be and their babies. And I know that the Member of Parliament for Faizabad had been actively involved as Chairman of Southwest Regional Health Authority in this. Madam Speaker, the gender imbalance is also something that requires attention, and more women are being educated at the tertiary level. Men get better pay than women for doing the same job in some instances. These are challenges for both sexes and need to be addressed. And of course, equal pay for equal work, and the issue of male underachievement also needs to be addressed to strengthen the productive male sector. And a working relationship between private and public sectors needs to be implemented to build a merit-based, talent-appreciative society that eliminates the gender bias. It's also very economical. It's an economic issue, Madam Speaker, also when you deal with this gender disparity that we have existing at this point in time. Another recommendation, Madam Speaker, is to institute a national system of properly run daycare centers involving public and private initiatives, which will help to address one of the major stresses of working women. And these are all just recommendations that can really see the protection of women against domestic violence and sexual abuse, and in also keeping with that.
Member for Couva North, your original speaker time is now spent. You're entitled to 15 more minutes extended time to complete your contribution. So if you wish, you may continue.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Now, Madam Speaker, I also want to make reference to an article by Dr. Gabrielle Hussein that was titled, "What's Our Response to Domestic Violence?" And in there she said, somewhere in Trinidad and Tobago, there's a woman who is going to be the next one killed. It's just a waiting game until we know her name. We don't have an urgent, coherent, cross-sectoral national strategy to prevent or even systematically reduce this violence against women. I'll be relieved but surprised if we do by the time we hear the news. And this is the sort of disenchantment that exists out there, Madam Speaker, with respect to protection of women. Our women are being killed daily. There are increasing numbers of murders resulting out of domestic violence. We see, of course, increasing human trafficking, and I spoke about that earlier, violent crimes against our women, some heinous crimes. And what do we do as a society to deal with the scourge? And as much as we stand here and talk, we really need to get down and act on it. And as much as we have heard the ministers speak about acting on it and plans and programs and policies, there's also this issue of getting everyone together to do what is necessary. In addition to that, Madam Speaker, let me say that we will continue to advocate both in and out of the Parliament. As women, we have a duty and an obligation to all women in society to ensure that they develop positively and progressively, and that is the only way we can foster a healthy and safe country. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise today to contribute to this debate, and I'd like to start by saying that from our perspective on this side, we don't see any politics with respect to a discussion on violence and abuse of either women or children in our society. Madam Speaker, I've sat here and I've listened to the contributions by those on the other side and by my colleague for Tobago East. And as a member on this side, I'd like to take the opportunity on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago to publicly congratulate Minister Ayanna Webster-Roy, the Member of Parliament for Tobago East, for the tremendous work that she is doing in bringing not only gender policy, but driving things like the Children's Authority, as well as a number of other initiatives for the protection of women in our society. And to answer the member for Couva North, Minister Webster-Roy has taken on and driven the opening of many of those houses and homes to which she's referred for protection of not only women, but the young men, the transition homes, the safe homes, etc. And it was interesting to listen to the comment and the advice in inverted commas of my friend from Couva North to say, listen, you had to go out there and you had to blow your trumpet and you have to sing your own praises and you have to let the public know what it is you do. Whilst there may be some merit in that, those on this side don't necessarily believe in that, and we believe just in doing good and doing it for the whole sake of doing good. It's not publicizing it. It's all about decency, integrity, class, and doing these types of things. One of the issues I haven't heard referred to this afternoon that is very, very commonplace and unfortunately growing with respect to abuse of women in our society is the use of social media. So I haven't heard the entering of a discussion as to what role social media is playing in our society, how social media is being used to shame people, and how social media is being used in society to attack women. And you hear the murmurings from those on the other side that will be ignored. So, Madam Speaker, that is a serious scourge on society, and I look forward to the Attorney General bringing the bill for debate on cybercrime, and for us facing the reality of how social media is being used to defame people, to hide behind the anonymity of a number of sites, the use of Facebook, the use of WhatsApp, and all of the various forums, all of the various platforms that are being used. We've seen it. We've seen cases in our courts by women who have come out of relationships and their former partners may have used photographs, videos, etc., taken at the time that were very personal and intimate, and they then use that for abuse. We've seen happening all too frequently, unfortunately, in our society, the use of these social media platforms to attack persons, and that is a form of violence and abuse. It's emotional abuse, it is verbal abuse, it's psychological abuse, and that is going on all too frequently. And I wouldn't hazard to say the genesis of where that started from, and in particular, which foreigners may have come here and may have advised that these are the platforms to be used. Madam Speaker, some of the things we've listened to this afternoon, and one of the things I also didn't hear touched on is something I learned about reading one of the many reports from the Member of Parliament from Tobago Eastern, the ministry that she heads up, is something called non-partner abuse, and the whole phenomenon of non-partner abuse. So we've heard about domestic abuse, we've heard about abuse between partners who are in an intimate relationship, in sexual relationships, in all different types of relationships. But one that I haven't heard addressed this afternoon, and I'd like to touch on very briefly, Madam Speaker, is that of non-partner abuse. Non-partner abuse is when persons are not in an intimate relationship. They're not in a sexual relationship. They're not in a cohabital relationship. They're not in a marriage or any form of living together. But they have some sort of relationship where they interact. Where they may interact, it might be in an employment setting. It may also be interaction on the basis of a need, some sort of financial dependence, or some sort of relationship, a familial relationship, or even a friendship type of relationship. And I was shocked to hear and to read the statistics that very often in these relationships, men do abuse the women on that side. And these women are not in an intimate relationship with these men. And these men would take advantage of the women in our society. They take advantage of the young girls in our society. And it's from all different walks of life, unfortunately. And when you interact with these women, or you ask a question, it is a psychological breakdown of the women that takes place over a period of time that has led them into believing that they can't get out of it. I heard my friend from Faizabad ask that rhetorical question, because we all ask it. Well, if you know you're in an abusive relationship, why don't you get out of the relationship? Unfortunately, we've learned it's not as easy as that. So we on this side, and we on the government, and I dare say we in the country, must provide these safe houses. We must provide these safe spaces. There are a number of NGOs that do it. These are not things that are publicized, because by definition, safe houses are not something that we should talk about in public in terms of the address and the location, etc. I'd like to now use the opportunity, Madam Speaker, to thank some of the bodies, some of the authorities, the men and women in Trinidad and Tobago, our public servants, who are going over and beyond what can be expected to provide services in this arena for abused women and abused children. For example, the counter-trafficking unit. Madam Speaker, I'd like to take this opportunity to publicly thank the handful of men and women in this counter-trafficking unit and the Ministry of National Security, Children's Authority part, and the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. It's literally a handful who are under-resourced. I've asked the Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of National Security for us to find additional resources. And I'll use an example that is quite current right now. When there was recently a raid in Trinidad, and they picked up 19 young Venezuelan women. That was my first direct involvement with the scourge that we face. And the counter-trafficking unit did yeoman service, and I'd like to publicly thank them now on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. With minimal resources, they need drivers, they need interpreters, but what they were able to do is to protect these 19 young girls, and they did a great job keeping them out of the public eye, dealing with them confidentially. I remember one Saturday night getting a call from the head of the counter-trafficking unit. One of the young girls was bleeding internally, unfortunately, and needed to be taken to the hospital in Trinidad, General Hospital in Trinidad, and we had to arrange police protection. So I'd like to thank the officer in charge of that division who answered her phone at that late hour of the night and immediately provided police protection for this young girl who was terrified to go to a public institution because she was convinced the demons and the villains who operate in this space were going to find her there. And I thank all of the men and women in those divisions who have done their work in the protection of these young girls, these women, as well as children. I heard the mention of the electronic bracelets. The cabinet did certify and approve the award of a contract for the implementation of these electronic bracelets. As far as I'm concerned, it's taking a bit too long for us to get it implemented, for it to get implemented, and then for it to start working, for that unit and division to start working. I heard it suggested that you tie that in to the orders, the protection orders. Unfortunately, protection orders, like every other court order, depend on the persons respecting the law. So yes, there has been, and that, as I say, there's no politics in it. There has been in our society an ignoring of these protection orders. Unfortunately, we've even had some incidents where the persons who have obtained the protection orders have encouraged the abusive partner to re-engage them. And it's because of that same psychological breakdown, those same psychological effects that abuse over a period of time take effect. It is real, Madam Speaker, and we as a society have to provide that level of support for these vulnerable women and also, unfortunately, children in our society. Thank you. The safe homes. Madam Speaker, safe homes are spread throughout Trinidad and Tobago. Do we have enough? The answer is no. There are a number of private sector safe homes, and I'd like to thank the men and women who open their homes and open their properties to allow us those opportunities. Because part of the whole safety of a safe house is that persons don't know where it's located. It's not located in a state location. The minister is also working very hard on building in these halfway homes, as we call it as lay people. These homes where women who are trying to get back on their feet after going through abusive relationships and may have children with them, they can go into these safe spaces. There will be facilities to look after the children after school and to allow these women to get back on their feet, start to make money, start to earn money. Madam Speaker, I don't know if we really recognize as a society how prevalent this is throughout our society and how many people on a daily basis face this scourge and face the abuse, be it domestic abuse, be it all other types of abuse and violence towards their persons, including psychological and emotional abuse. But they still manage to wake up every morning to keep going. So we also need more psychologists. We need more assistance in that area as well. We as a country need to also not protect those who engage in that type of behavior, has been my constant conversation. I'd also like to take the opportunity to congratulate the minister on her barbershop program, because she's right. Madam Speaker, my respectful submission is men have a very, very important role to play in this. I think a part of the problem and what has spawned this growing phenomenon of abuse of women in our society is because our men are being left behind. Our boys are being left behind. Women have long since broken any glass ceiling. There's no longer a glass ceiling in existence. But what society didn't prepare the males for is that change in roles. It's a conversation I've had with my friend, the Honourable Member for Tobago East, time and time again. Our young boys have not been provided with the support that they need for this change in roles. As the girls exceed them in academics, as the girls form their own independence, there is no longer this traditional need by women in our society for the financial assistance of men and to be dependent on men. And men have not always reacted well to that. But we need, at this stage, Madam Speaker, my respectful submission, to work with the young men in our society, the young boys in our society, from early ages, to prepare them to deal with this phenomenon. One of the things that my friend has done from Tobago East is the barbershop program. And she invited me to participate in the barbershop program, in a training program for the males in the police service, teaching men in the police service to become trainers to then go out and teach the rest of the men in the police service a number of things. One, to recognize what happens in an abusive space. Two, to sensitize them as to how, when they get called into those environments and they get called out to duty to respond to domestic violence and domestic abuse and these types of situations where women and children are abused, how they intervene, how they deal with the situation. But most importantly for me in that barbershop program is to teach men how to deal with what I've just described, which is our changing role in society, and not to react in violent, physical manners when they think they're being challenged by women. But it's not a challenge by women, it's just a shifting of the roles. And that barbershop allowed a safe space for men to have that conversation, because very often men are too macho, as we say in Trinidad, madam, and they don't want to confront the realities of this situation. But I, participating in that for the limited time that I did, saw big grown men, the toughest of our men because they're in the police service, etc., going out there and facing criminals. After about half an hour of conversation and skirting the issues, really begin to open up and begin to have the conversations. And men themselves need those safe spaces to confront amongst themselves without fear of ridicule. How do they deal with these types of situations? How do you deal with the situations of infidelity? How do you deal with the situations of a woman deciding she wants to move on? How do you deal with the situations of no longer being the breadwinner? You maybe have lost your job and your wife or your partner is now the breadwinner. These are the things, Madam Speaker, that this motion also needs to address and that we as a society need to address in how we prepare the future society, the future men and women growing up not to confront each other in violence, not to confront each other in physical means and circumstances. It happens all too often. Today we were having conversation about that situation that my friend from Faizabad referred to, where a man in Sandy Grande decided to take his wife's life and then tried to take his own, but failed, and now is facing a murder charge. How do we as a society deal with that? I can't say much more about it because it's before the courts, but these are the types of instances. Now, I'd like to correct something that, unfortunately, I think it was just getting caught up in the contribution that my friend from Couva North said, but I can't let it remain on the Hansard, on the record, where she says that women are dying daily and then being murdered daily. That is not so. But any murder of a woman in those types of circumstances, one, is too much as far as we are concerned. We have to find a better way to protect. The Commissioner of Police, upon entering office, and this being a topic of conversation, told the men and women in Trinidad and Tobago Police Service that they need to be sensitized. And when the women come in and they have the protection orders and they make the complaints, that they don't just say, well, I don't have a vehicle, I can't respond, there's nothing I could do, well, we'll get there soon. But to understand the urgency of the situation for a person, a woman in these instances, to reach out to the police service and say, I need help. It's my respectful submission, Madam Speaker, that has to go to the top of the priority list. The police, and I make the call now to the men and women in the police stations across the country, when these instances take place, whether there's a protection order or not, and females in our society call out for help, let us drop what we're doing and go and assist, because that in itself may end up saving our life. And it can't be part of a proper argument to say, well, a savior now, and then a month from now you may do something. We can't deal with the future, we can't change the past. Let us immediately prioritize when those calls are made, those SOS calls, those calls for help are made by women across the country, that the men and women in the police stations give them the time of the day and immediately go to their assistance. Madam Speaker, last weekend we had an event up in Toko, and on my way back out of Toko, I stopped at the Matura police post. And I'd like to use this opportunity now to congratulate and to thank the 2 police officers who were in the Matura police post. Because when I went into the station, it was a male corporal and a female WPC. And there was a woman who came out from the back of the station, which was in a residential house, and it was the downstairs of the house. And I could see she was dressed in let's call it her night clothing, and just with a cover all over her. So I asked, well, what is going on? When you go into police stations, you inquire, what is the strength? Who is on call? What are the issues that they're dealing with? And they told me that right now they're dealing with a domestic situation. And unfortunately, it's a repeat situation. It turned out that was the wife of an abusive husband, and she had sought refuge in the police station. And I'd like to commend those 2 police officers here today publicly for how they were dealing with it. As they began to tell me about all the woes and all the difficulties they faced, they did not lose the human touch. And very often in those circumstances, Madam Speaker, that is what is going to make the difference. Because a person who is abused is going through all sorts of psychological trauma, conflict, turmoil internally. And we on the outside may not be able to appreciate that. And it is how we interface with them at the given point in time that will make the difference as to how they go on with their day and maybe even possibly their life. Madam Speaker, the NGOs in this space and this area are playing a very important part. And again, I use the opportunity to thank the NGOs. You see, because this motion by my friend from Faizabad, the honorable member from Faizabad, ends by saying, be it resolved that the government take urgent steps to ensure the protection of our nation's women. It's not only the government, as I think we all accept here in this debate this afternoon, it's all of us. The member for Tobago East and myself have listed but a handful of the projects and the various things that the government are doing. From a national security perspective, we take it very seriously. It has formed part of the conversation. I'm reaching out here again publicly to call upon the men and women in the police service to prioritize how we deal with these types of situations. There's some great stories in there. A few weeks ago, I attended a passing out parade at the prisons. And for the first time, there was a batch of all-female prison officers graduating, 34 of them. I commend the prison service for that. Part of the training of those female prison officers is how are they dealing with the female prisoners. Because very often, female prisoners may be inside there because they were at some stage in their life subject of abuse, etc. And you find this very often in the prison system. I was walking through the YTC a few weeks ago as well, and in interacting with some of the inmates at YTC, some of them were unfortunately subjects of abuse in their home circumstances. When you're subjected to that type of life, they have to find an outlet, right? But what we may see is the violent life or the turning to the criminal gangs, etc. So you're right, we need to intervene, but as a society into this. And the government to pump as much resources as they can into these types of situations. I'm constantly arguing with my cabinet colleagues, in fact, up to recently, this week, that we need to provide more resources to our Children's Authority. We need to provide more resources to the work that Minister Ayanna Webster-Roy is doing for more safe houses, for more halfway houses, more transition homes, the member of Parliament for Diego Martin Northeast was making that point to Minister Webster and I recently, a week ago, saying what happens to the children, and in this case, for example, the females, who are, for example, in a St. Jude's environment, and they hit the age of 18. From a legal perspective, you must now leave the community residence. You must now go on your... But they're not prepared. They're not prepared for that harsh world. So we were talking about what it is that can be done by the state to provide that halfway house, to provide that safe shelter for them, to catch themselves. As we all know... Correct. And I'll tell you as well, as the Minister of National Security, we face that difficulty, especially with the young women, because we don't have enough facilities. I remember one Friday night getting a late call from the Commissioner of Prisons that the girls who were being housed up at the, you remember that? Up at the female home, the home that we have for juvenile girls, they were basically revolting, rioting in inverted commas, and how could we deal with them? And when you listen to these stories, they were telling the officers who responded, you can't touch me. I'm a female and I'm a minor, you can't touch me. Go beyond that. Go into that psychological mindset to watch authority and say, you can't touch me. And that is what we're dealing with as a society. And these are things we need to confront frontally. We need to find a way to deal with it. The only way we could do it is by taking the politics out of it. So I commend you, Member for Faizabad, for bringing this motion here, and for us looking at it collectively as 41 members, right? And to give us the opportunity to speak about it publicly and to say these are some of the things we're doing. Again, another thing that happened within the last, I think it's a month and a half, and I thank the outgoing Chief of Defense Staff, Rear Admiral Pritchard, for having the foresight in the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force to have a specific program for the female officers in the Defense Force. These are the types of things we need to do. And when I spoke to them and delivered a few remarks, I told those female Defense Force officers, do not underestimate, and I'll say it as well to our female police officers, 2 of whom are in the chamber now, 3 of whom are in the chamber now. Do not for a moment, officers, underestimate the role you are playing in society. And to the young girls out there who look up to you all as you wear your uniforms with pride, thank you. And I told the female Defense Force officers, your sisters in the Defense Force, to understand when you are just walking down the road in your uniform, young girls may be looking on and saying, that's what I want to do when I grow up. And you all, through your sisterhood and that bond of sisterhood, have to stand up to the elements of abuse. And if there are men doing those things, you all stand together. The 4th officer, female officer, now walks in. Do not for a moment underestimate the role that you all are playing. And we thank you for that leadership that you're providing. I wouldn't make that comment. One of the points that was made by my friend from Faizabad, and you've heard me make the same call here today, is that police must respond to all complaints, but sometimes that isn't being followed. In our communities, and as we get down to the community policing, there are more important roles to be played. In the police youth clubs, to the Minister of Education, in our educational, in our schools, we must be prepared to identify the children who may be acting a little differently, a little off, because they may be the products of what is going on in an abusive home. That's another thing we need to discuss, the effects it's having on that younger generation. I heard you say, and you're right, physical violence during pregnancy is only a beast, first of all, in my opinion, that will carry out that type of attack on a woman. But worse yet, when a woman is pregnant and carrying another being inside of her, protecting the baby inside of her, And we have this all too frequently happening. I have heard the stories myself of pregnant women being attacked by their partners or in these non-partner relationships. 3 more minutes. One of the things I'd like to suggest that we can do as a government is looking at the curriculum in our primary schools and our secondary schools. Let us work with the young men, exactly as I've said, along the lines that I've just said. The young men in terms of preparing them psychologically for this is how you face the world. There are going to be occasions where you may feel outdone by females, and that's okay. That is normal. You don't then have to use your physical brute and your physical strength to react to it. We need to have those conversations with our young people. I've also said a way to fight corruption in our society. Let us get back into the schools and teach ethics. We take it for granted. Madam Speaker, we take it for granted that every young child growing up in our society has the same opportunities we may have or we may be able to give our children. There are many children in our society who are growing up, and they may be in single-parent homes, and that mother is out there working 2 and 3 jobs just to be able to provide. We cannot take it for granted as a society that those young children will grow up knowing what is right and what is wrong. And I'll give you another example, again from the YTC visit. There was this small little boy in what they call the dormitories. The cells in YTC are called dormitories, where they have about six young boys in these dormitories that are all barred off. And there was one small boy, and I was asking all of them, what is it that you're in here for? And I saw his head drop and the look of remorse. And Madam Speaker, when I engaged in conversation with him, he was remorseful. He said, I'm in here for trafficking drugs. Afterwards, the warden, he was 13 years old. The warden told me this story. He said, you see that young boy you just engaged with? When he came in here, he was big and he bad, and he walked in here, it's just, you all can't do me anything, and this. And when you heard the story,
Honourable Member for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West, your original speaking time is now spent. You're entitled to 15 more minutes to complete your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. What had happened is unfortunately, his mother had left him. And the mother had left him and he was being brought up by the father. The father didn't have food in the house, but there was a man down the street that told him, if you sell this product in school, you'd be able to get money to buy food. When he started doing that, of course, he had no idea what he was doing was wrong. And they told me that when he came into the system, he was not remorseful. He didn't believe he was doing anything.
I'd ask the members whose phone has gone off to go outside, please get their phones under control. And all members take this opportunity to ensure that their phones are on silent, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And they told me that over time working with that young boy, he then learned right from wrong. So the remorse that we were seeing on that day was learned during his incarceration. And that to me was confirmation of exactly the point I was just making. This transfers now to abuse as well, Madam Speaker, because young boys may grow up thinking it is okay for them to engage in the shouting down at girls, the pushing of girls, the hitting of girls, and these types of things. And we need to get in there at the young ages and say, no, it is not okay. And I take up the challenge from the member for Tobago East, as I've told her before. We the men, we the leaders in society, we the parliamentarians, the male parliamentarians, need to go out there and give that message to the men. The policemen need to go out there and give that message to the men. Because she made the point to me. She said very often, the member for Tobago East, Madam Speaker, made the point to me that very often when she as a minister goes out there and tries to engage in these forums among the male forum, she senses from the body language that the message is not getting across. And it is time that us men get up there And we stand with the member of Tobago East and others to deliver this message and to do the work that is necessary. So, Madam Speaker, I agree. In conclusion, I agree that it is a problem in our society, the abuse of women. I also have added the abuse of children. And I agree that more needs to be done with respect to it. But as we've listed here this afternoon, the government is down to board. The government is doing as much as it can. We can always try to do more. But how I want to end is by thanking everyone, Madam Speaker, through this House for all of the great work that is going on out there, because there is a lot of great work that is going on out there, and all of the volunteers and all of the public servants, all of the NGOs, all of the people who are working in this arena. And I end by thanking the men and women in uniform, both in the Defense Force, in the police service, and also in immigration. I end with the story when Minister Dillon and I were down in Cedros this week, and we saw in the holding cell at Cedros, we talked about Venezuela. We saw a young Venezuelan woman with a 3-month-old baby and a 3-year-old. And I had the chief immigration officer with me. And before we left the station, two young men and a young woman came and were at the counter, and I asked what are they, and they are the roving immigration officers who are going around the country looking at these cases, making the recommendation that persons in those circumstances be released on supervisory orders, and adding that human touch. And it was good to see that taking place, Madam Speaker. So to all of these persons out there who are making the difference, as a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago and as a representative for Port of Spain, North St. Anne's West, I thank them. And with those few words, Madam Speaker, I thank you.
House. Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in accordance with Standing Order 53, I beg to move that the debate on the fourth private member's motion be adjourned.
Honourable members, the question is that the debate on private member motion number 4 be it resolved that the government take urgent steps to ensure that the protection of our nation's women be adjourned. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it.
Government business motions.
The Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Be it motion number 3, Madam Speaker, the Senate amendments to Companies Amendment Bill 2018. And I beg to move that motion standing in my name. Be it resolved that the Senate amendments to the Companies Amendment Bill 2018 listed in Appendix 2 be now considered.
Honourable members, the question is that the Senate amendments to the Companies Amendment Bill 2018 listed in Appendix 2 be now considered. All in favour say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it.
Clause 9, in proposed section 337C, in subsection 1, by deleting the word enable and substituting the word identify. Okay. New clause 10A, insert after clause 10 the following new clause. The Companies Act is amended in section 516A, in subsection 1, by deleting the words 1st July 2016 to 16th September 2016 and substituting the words 1st May 2019 to 30th August 2019, and B, in subsection 3, by deleting the words 16th September 2016 and substituting the words 30th August 2019.
Honourable members, I take it there's agreement that the two amendments would be taken together. Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I am pleased to report that the bill, the Senate amendment, the Companies Amendment Bill 2018, had a successful passage through the Senate. There are two small amendments to be made, but they are quite important. The latter is actually quite powerful. With respect to Clause 9, so as to have the correct wording, read in the new section 337C, in subclause 1, it really was to allow for the identity of the party to be discerned. In that circumstance, we needed to put in the word identify so as to enable that the party be identified, Madam Speaker. It's really quite simply a linguistic change. I apologize. Madam Speaker, the second clause, which is a new clause 10A to be inserted, is important in the context that, as it stands right now, the company's registry has some 104,000 companies in existence. Those companies are several in type: for-profit companies limited by shares, companies limited by guarantee, not-for-profit companies, externally registered companies, and then, of course, previously, companies that were previously in existence and that have yet to be continued. When we look at that particular matrix, of the 104,000 companies listed in the registry, nearly 20% of that registry is in a state of decay. 20% of the register is in fact non-compliant. And a number of these companies find themselves in non-compliance for a very important reason. The calculation for penalties for the registration of late documents is really done on a multiplication basis. It is $300 per month per document. And then you multiply by the number of years. So if you fail to file your annual return for 4 years, you take $300, multiply by 12, multiply by 4. And if you fail to file your annual return together with failing to file your notice of declaration of your directors or your secretary or your change of directors, etc., you're finding yourself actually running into the thousands of dollars by way of penalties over a 6-year period in particular. Some companies find themselves with indigent shareholders who are not able to bring the companies up to date, and that is most important in management companies that own property. In those circumstances, townhousing companies are arranged that way, condominiums are arranged that way. Sometimes the owners of the properties there, who own their apartments, etc., in two forms. One, by way of a lease to the apartment, and secondly, by way of a share in a company, which is a management company. What has happened is there is an inability to bring those companies up to date because people just simply can't afford to do it. We have engaged in a deliberate exercise of identifying the delinquent companies, and so as to facilitate an opportunity to allow them to come up to deck without punishing them with debilitating sanctions, we propose that an amnesty be granted in the period May 2019, that is from the 1st of May 2019 to the 30th of August 2019. This will allow us to go on a robust education and information campaign to alert people that there is an amnesty for this period till August 30th, 2019, and to go on a marching exercise to obtain compliance by filing of these documents. It is a huge relief for literally potentially some 20,000 companies on the register that are in default at present. In those circumstances, after having had the companies come up to date, we will be going on a very aggressive exercise to strike off companies and to treat with assets according to the sections of the Companies Act for the disposition of assets on involuntary winding up and striking off equations. That is the rationale for the new clause 10A, Madam Speaker, and I think that it augurs well and in the best interest of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, and I beg to move.
I'm not sure what you beg to move, so I think you should let us know what you beg to move.
And Madam Speaker, I'm begging to move that this House agree with the Senate in the amendment to Clause 9 as set out in Appendix 2, and I'm also begging to move that this House agree with the Senate's insertion of the new Clause 10A as circulated on Appendix 2.
Honourable members, the question is that this House agree with the Senate in the amendments to Clauses 9 and the assertion of the new clause 10 of the Companies Amendment Bill 2018. Member for Point of Peer.
Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I just rise quickly. I have a few comments to make on this amendment, these two amendments coming from the Senate to the Attorney General. The Honorable Attorney General, question I would like to ask is what triggered this amnesty that is coming now? Because I know back in July, just before July 2016, there was an amnesty given, and the rationale at the time, if I remember, during your debate, was to actually do what you're doing now again. And one of the concerns that you had at that point in time was that you were cleaning up the registry, and you were giving people time, companies, to come up to speed, and you would have been striking off these companies over a period of time. So we are just curious to know what triggered and why this amendment wasn't brought when you first piloted these amendments in the House a couple of weeks ago. Because I know it did not come from the other place. It really was an amendment driven by you, the Attorney General. The other comment I would like to make is there a period, how far back would you allow a company to file? Is there a sort of a time period or a time limit of how far back you are asking a company to bring up their company's filing to date? Madam Speaker, in principle, we agree with this amendment. We have no difficulty, but we would like the Attorney General to answer some of those questions. Thank you.
Attorney General.
Thank you. I thank the Honourable Member for the questions. Madam Speaker, I answer as follows. This extension of time was a government proposal, specifically one which the Ministry of Finance approved, and certainly the rest of our cabinet approved. It came about because in our exercise in two areas, we thought it necessary to bring a further amnesty. We only crystallized that position when we settled upon the non-profit organizations bill. So as Madam Speaker would be aware, we laid that bill in Parliament today, and there are some 7,900 odd non-profit organizations. And in capturing that new non-profit organization registry, alongside a beneficial ownership registry which we're creating, in looking at the data across it, even though we've struck off hundreds of companies in the period since 2016 to now, and in fact last week there was a full-page notice of further companies to be struck off in anticipation of the non-profit organization registry, and secondly because we have been migrating data under a new system of companies. The companies registry IT system was the worst of the three systems there: the civil registry, the companies registry, and the land registry. The land registry is under full purchase right now in a new system, and the companies registry, that data migration has allowed us to drill in with specificity in the period post-2016. So, in summary, further data analysis in the period 2016 to now as a result of improvements in IT structures. Secondly, as a result of the imminent debate without breaching the rules of anticipation on the non-profit organizations bill, by bringing in some 7,900 non-profit organizations and then thousands others onto that NPO registry, we think it prudent to clean, cull, and manage the situation. The Honourable Member asked as well, what period backwards can people comply with this? Basically, all compliance, from any date that you fail to comply. So if your documents are 12 years in arrears, 15 years in arrears, you can bring them all up to date. So it is a golden opportunity with a proper education campaign to get this out into the public domain, to till the soil in anticipation of the non-profit organization, and very importantly, to till the soil for the preparation for the strike-offs as we go to deal with the companies that are properly defunct and can pose a risk to the financial system and facilitate money laundering, terrorist financing. Simple example being the juice cans and the use of an old defunct company that had $1 billion in drugs finding themselves in the United States of America. I beg to move.
Honourable members, the question is that this House agree with the Senate in the amendments to clauses 9 and the insertion of a new clause 10A of the Companies Amendment Bill 2018. All in favour say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. Leader of the House.
Very kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, before moving the adjournment, I wish to advise as follows. The government proposes to introduce the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2019 at the next sitting of the House. And in order to introduce this bill, it will be necessary to move the suspension of Standing Order 78. I therefore give notice pursuant to Standing Order 122(1) of my intention to move for the suspension of Standing Order 78 at the next sitting of the House to enable the introduction of the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2019. Madam Speaker, a copy of the bill will be circulated with the issuance of the next order paper. Madam Speaker, at this time, I would like to move the adjournment of the House to Friday next. Madam Speaker, on that day, we will be doing the non-profit organizations bill that was laid on the supplemental order paper. Thank you. Sorry, Madam Speaker, we'll be starting at 1:30.
Honourable members, there is one matter that qualifies to be raised on the motion of the adjournment of the House. I now call upon the member for Urupuch East.
Speaker. Madam Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 16, I rise to speak on a matter on the adjournment. I believe, Madam Speaker, I have 10 minutes to do so. Madam Speaker, the matter filed is a matter that brings us no pleasure and is a matter that deals with a very, very serious issue. It reads as follows. In light of recent fatal accidents involving the Boeing 737 MAX 8 aircrafts, the government should take urgent steps to cancel all commercial agreements to purchase or lease the 12 Boeing 737 MAX 8 planes being acquired for the Caribbean Airlines Limited's fleet. Madam Speaker, it is no secret that in the domain in the national community, in the media, social media and elsewhere, there is an international development that has taken place surrounding the crashes of 2 Boeing 737 MAX 8 aircrafts. Madam Speaker, on October 29, 2018, an Indonesian airline, Lion Air Flight 610, crashed into the Java Sea, killing, Madam Speaker, 189 persons. Madam Speaker, within less than 5 months, on March 8, 2019, an Ethiopian airline Flight 302 crashed, killing 157 persons on board. Madam Speaker, while the international press and the technical and financial part of the international press has raised several issues involving the suitability of those aircrafts, calling into question its engineering design, its IT capacity, the aircraft itself, the 737 MAX 8. And let me be very clear, at this time, Caribbean Airlines does not have any 737 MAX 8 aircrafts. But Madam Speaker, they have called into question serious questions after both the crashes, whether or not that aircraft is technically and engineeringly, in an engineering sense and in an IT sense. There have been reports, Madam Speaker, in 10 minutes or less. I really don't want to plow through materials before me and quote at length, but really to give the headline issues. In the international press, there's speculation that both the crash of the Lion Air and the Ethiopian Airlines, as a fact, it took place within minutes of takeoff. And there are serious concerns that what has caused it is some type of IT malfunction involving the nose diving 12 times faster than it should, and a control mechanism, a sensor control mechanism, where the pilots lose control. And that is technical business, and that is a matter that is subject now to an international investigation, I believe in France, a forensic investigation. But Madam Speaker, long before any report comes to us by the end of this year, there's another issue. And that is, Madam Speaker, interestingly, 1 month after the October 21st crash last year, the government of Trinidad and Tobago announced by way of a function in Jamaica, and I believe one in Trinidad, that the Caribbean Airlines had taken a decision to to acquire, we believe by leasing, 12 Boeing 737 MAX 8 aircrafts. Madam Speaker, I raise this because prior to that, it was not in the public domain in any meaningful way, if at all. We had not heard of it. We had not seen any releases. Certainly, there was no statement. The Prime Minister of this country made a statement in this Parliament on the acquisition of the boats from Australia. There was no statement, to my knowledge, made on the acquisition of 12 Boeing jets, the cost of which, Madam Speaker, we are not certain as a matter of public record, because I do not proceed by press conferencing and that type of thing. On the public record, we have no knowledge of what is the cost. When did this deal take place? Who negotiated this deal? What is the cost of the 12 jets? How much money have we paid down for that? Is it 50 million TT dollars? Is it less? Is it more? What is the total cost? Madam Speaker, if according to the research, $75 million to $100 million US dollars is the cost of one jet, we estimate that Trinidad and Tobago will be entering into another 6 to 7 billion Trinidad and Tobago dollars deal. This, Madam Speaker, is the exact problem that we faced years ago with the OPVs, where when government changed, problem after problem to clean up a mess with a contract we did not know enough of with the OPVs. This, I put it to the House and the country, this Boeing 737 MAX 8 purchase acquisition is exactly akin to another OPV scandal in this country. So the minister should tell us when they entered into, who entered into that arrangement. Did it have cabinet approval? Not who recused themselves necessarily. Did it have cabinet approval? Yes.
Of what the text of your motion is.
Yes.
So please get back to
Sure. So having provided the information on that secret deal, we have the crash before us now. We have reports emanating all over the place. Madam Speaker, what was amazing in light of these accidents, and I come to it now, is that there were countries across the world, China, South Korea, India, Ethiopia, of course, Turkey, Europe, Mexico, Cayman Islands, Guyana, Brazil, and finally the United States, that grounded and banned 737 MAX 8 aircraft. And Trinidad and Tobago, again, was last in the queue, as we seem to be internationally and everything, whether it's Venezuela or anything, we are last in the queue. The United National Congress, Senator Anita Haynes had to put out a press release calling on the government to ban the 737 MAX 8. And I think it was the next day, in the aftermath of Senator Haynes' press release, that the government took some action, I believe. When the country, and I have the newspaper reports here, when there was a report in the press of panic, the Minister of Finance, in his usual way, he said he blamed the press. He buffed up the press. The Minister of Finance buffed up the press and said, what you talking about panic? Carl don't have any 737 MAX 8. But he, of course, could not understand that the passengers, the public, and the pilots and so on, they were concerned not only with Caribbean Airlines, but of aircrafts coming in and leaving Trinidad and Tobago. But he buffed them up. But, Madam Speaker, then the minister called for more information on this, more information on that, and so on. But, Madam Speaker, the position it is now is that Trinidad and Tobago has some deal, some secret arrangement with Boeing on this matter. I am calling upon this government to halt all agreements pending the outcome of the report on the crashes that took place, Lion Air and Ethiopian Airlines. I'm calling upon this government to also, while it is a legal issue, because you may have already entered into a contract or some type of agreement, the fact that those aircrafts have been grounded across the globe also gives you legal leverage now to negotiate with Boeing, of course, so that you can take action. The minister, in fact, somebody told me there was a buck interfering in the business of Caribbean Airlines, but, Madam Speaker, the minister need to get his story clear with Caribbean Airlines and tell us which legal firm has been recruited, at what cost, what is the legal advice, and when would Caribbean Airlines be announcing, with fanfare or not, that they have cancelled or postponed these arrangements pending the outcome. Because, Madam Speaker, Trinidad and Tobago is always slow to act. But today, I want to just tell you, Madam Speaker, in the closing minute or two, that just today we got the news, Indonesia's Garuda Airline canceled its $4.9 billion order for the Boeing 737 MAX 8. Madam Speaker, Indonesia has gone $4.9 billion United States dollars. They canceled an order for 50 aircrafts, you're 12. And they have done this with sound, as they say, with sound legal advice. Indonesia has done it. Malaysia, the Malaysian Airlines is now reviewing their arrangements. Tell us who is also the middleman here, because on the website of Boeing, Trinidad and Tobago is not listed as a purchaser. And there are leasing companies that are involved. Is there a leasing company that was recruited to lease or acquire these aircrafts from Boeing? And if so, what company? And what are the legal implications for having a leasing company in the middle of Trinidad and Tobago and the Boeing company? So, Madam Speaker, there are serious questions to answer. Where is the legal advice? How long should we wait for the legal advice? And where is this money? Where is $6 to $7 billion coming from a government that every single day claim they have no money? They have no money. From an empty treasury. Where is the $6 billion, $7 billion coming from? Those are some of the questions, Madam Speaker, we would like the minister, the very interventionist minister, to speak to today. I thank you so much.
Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, there was such a... Madam Speaker, I haven't even begun to speak and cover South is shouting. I beg your protection, Madam Speaker.
Okay, so members, we don't have long here again. I will ask everyone to comply with the standing orders. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There was such a torrent of misinformation from the member for Oropouche East. It was such a barrage of untruths. I don't know where to start. But some housekeeping matters. The OPVs are currently the pride of the Brazilian Navy, the Trinidad and Tobago OPVs.
Trinidad class.
The OPVs built for Trinidad and Tobago are the pride of the Brazilian Navy. That's number one. Number two, Madam Speaker, it has been made clear in the public domain, in press releases, in press conferences, in advertisements, and in other forms of communication that Caribbean Airlines is not purchasing any aircraft from the Boeing Aircraft Company, Madam Speaker. I want to say that again. Caribbean Airlines is not purchasing any aircraft from the Boeing Aircraft Company. Madam Speaker, the member I didn't say a word when he was talking.
Minister of Finance, it seems some or the other when we love to hear you and like we don't like to hear you. So I'll ask all members, please, let's hear the response. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was very quiet. Now, Madam Speaker, Caribbean Airlines and its forerunner, BWI, has been in the leasing business for 20 years. And the government of which the member of Oropouche East was a part was involved in the leasing of aircraft and knows fully well that Caribbean Airlines and its predecessor did not purchase aircraft for at least 20 years. The last aircraft the BWI bought was the Lockheed L-10-11. No. The last jet aircraft that Caribbean Airlines or its predecessor purchased was the Lockheed aircraft, as far as I can remember, Madam Speaker. But they have been leasing airlines for years, aircraft for years. So that by putting this mischief into the public domain about Caribbean Airlines buying planes, when the honourable member knows very well that for the last 20 years, Caribbean Airlines has been leasing aircraft because it is more efficient and more economical to do so. That is just pure mischief, Madam Speaker. Now let's go to the facts. The leases of the current B737-800 fleet are due to expire over the period 2019 to 2021. As a responsible entity, Caribbean Airlines commissioned a fleet planning team to undertake a study of the possible options available to them. The main aim of the committee was to determine and recommend the best possible jet option for the airline with consideration for lower operating costs, minimal additional investment, enhanced brand visibility, optimized passenger revenue, minimal disruption for their customers, and equipping pilots, engineers, and technicians with newer technology to enable improved operations and technical reliability. The jets under consideration by the committee were as follows: the Boeing 737-800, the current fleet, Boeing 737 MAX 8, Airbus A320neo, Airbus A320neo PW, Madam Speaker. An analysis of each aircraft type was conducted and a comparison was done. After considerable deliberation, Madam Speaker, the committee decided that the Boeing 737 MAX 8 was the best and most efficient aircraft for Caribbean Airlines' new fleet. For many reasons, Madam Speaker, but not least of all, being the fact that since these aircraft are similar to the current fleet of Boeing 737-800s, the additional pilot training, the additional engineering training, and the additional operational requirements switching from the 737 to this 800 to the 737 MAX 8 would have been minimal, Madam Speaker. If Caribbean Airlines had chosen to go with the Airbus, for example, they would have had to retrain all of their pilots, all of their ground crew, all of their engineers, all of their various staff members, Madam Speaker, and also order completely new spare parts and so on. These are the kind of decisions that responsible people take when they're considering an acquisition of this complex nature. So at the end of the day, after weighing up all the pros and cons, the cost of the lease, the fuel consumption of the aircraft, the passenger capacity, the fact that the new Boeing aircraft would not require any comprehensive additional pilot training and so on, the airline took the decision to lease 12 brand new Boeing MAX 8 aircraft, like every other airline would do, Madam Speaker. And let me just move on, Madam Speaker. For the record, on 4th of August 2009, a Bangkok Airways ATR aircraft crashed, killing one of the crew members. On the 13th of September 2010, an ATR aircraft crashed, killing 17 people. In November 2010, an ATR aircraft crashed, killing 68 people. All 7 crew members and all 61 passengers were killed. In 2012, an ATR aircraft crashed and killed all passengers, Madam Speaker, and so on and so on. However, the former government signed an order in September 2010 for 9 ATR aircraft at a cost of $1.4 billion. Purchase $1.4 billion. And Madam Speaker, after all these crashes, Madam Speaker, I did not speak when they spoke. After all these crashes that I just read out, including in particular the crash in September 2010, killed 17 people. The crash in November 2010 killed 68 people, Madam Speaker. In 2011, the UNC government bought 5 ATR aircraft. After all these crashes, Madam Speaker. So it seems to me that it is do as I say, but not as I do, Madam Speaker. Now let me, UNC style, but let me deal now with the facts. In February 2019, after that comprehensive study that I referred to, Caribbean Airlines executed 12 aircraft leases with 2 lessors, as has been its practice for 20 years, including the 5 years and 3 months under the UNC, for the lease of Boeing 737 MAX 8 aircraft for a period of 12 years per lease. The first delivery is scheduled for December 2010. The second, 2019, sorry. The second aircraft, 2020, January. The third aircraft, March 2020. The fourth aircraft, May 2020, and so on. So Caribbean Airlines entered into a lease arrangement to lease 12 aircraft. As the leases of its existing 12 aircraft expire, it is planning to replace them with Boeing 737 MAX 8 aircraft as and when the leases expire. So they signed a lease arrangement with 2 lessors to lease 12 aircraft. Shortly after that, Madam Speaker, in March 2019, a Boeing MAX 8 aircraft operated by Ethiopian Airlines crashed, resulting in the death of 157 passengers. Yeah. Caribbean Airlines has followed and continues to follow all of the information available in the international media. I have instructed Caribbean Airlines to determine their options, to determine their legal rights, and the various ways they can deal with this matter. I can tell you right now that in the lease arrangements, the aircraft cannot be delivered unless they are fit for purpose and certified as airworthy by the flag state, which is the FAA, the design state actually, and our local civil aviation authorities, Madam Speaker. So if the aircraft are certified as being not fit for purpose, then Caribbean Airlines will not have to take delivery and will not be obligated to pay any money and can pursue a refund of the deposit it made on its lease. Let me say as well, Madam Speaker, I don't have enough time, but there are multiple examples of aircraft being grounded or prohibited from flying temporarily because of some issue with respect to some part of equipment. Multiple examples. And then a month later, 2 months later, 3 months later, the civil aviation authorities all over the world have declared the aircraft to be safe and declared that the aircraft can fly. Madam Speaker, we are a responsible government. Yes. We will follow the advice from the civil aviation authorities of the world, and we will ensure that the passengers of Trinidad and Tobago are safe and secure as we protect their interests. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Honourable members, the question is, Honourable members, the question is that this House do now adjourn. All in favour say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. In accordance with Standing Orders 11 and 12.1, this House now stands adjourned to Friday, 29th March 2019 at 1:30 p.m.